I had started medical school in 1981, the year the first case of AIDS was described. I was an intern in the Bronx in the mid-'80s, and it was like living in the plague. I was watching young people my own age dying of a disease for which we really had no effective treatment, and it was horrible. There is no worse feeling as a physician than seeing a young person dying before you and truly having nothing to offer them but the comfort of being there with them. So I was very excited to work on HIV vaccines because it seemed like the most important medical need that the world faced at the time. It still is. But you have to remember, this is before there was effective antiretroviral therapy. So there was just nothing to do. It was absolutely dreadful. And not only was I working during the time that antiretroviral therapy was instituted, which was a miracle, we traveled abroad. So the rare exists to develop vaccines to protect the troops on deployment. So we were working in Thailand and then in Africa, particularly in Kenya and Uganda, with just wonderful collaborators, people who were highly skilled and highly motivated. But even though, once again, all I really wanted to do was stay in the lab, Debbie felt very strongly that we all needed to travel to where the epidemic was. So I had the opportunity to travel to Thailand, to Bangkok, to northern Thailand, to Rayong and Chonburi, where we were developing the vaccines, and interact with colleagues and go to clinics and see the people who we were working to protect and who were working with us on the vaccine. And this fundamentally changed me. It fundamentally changed me from thinking about my dendritic cells and my viruses, which entertained me endlessly, to really what needed to be done. And to the importance of engaging with communities, to engaging with the people who were on the front lines. And Debbie saw that I was good at this and not only supported me, but took advantage of that and allowed me to do that. So I had a lot of opportunity to both talk about my work, to talk about vaccines, to talk about what we knew and what we didn't know. And that felt at the time like the most urgent work that I could be doing. So when I was thinking of coming back to New York, I had several opportunities at other institutions that were good opportunities to come and have my own lab. But I had 4 little boys, I was going through a messy divorce, I wanted to have a life, and I knew that I'd been on hard money, and that this was before the cuts at NIH made it really hard to get grants. I assumed I'd be able to get grants, but the common wisdom is that it was going to be an additional third of my time, which I really didn't have. So I was, as I always was, I was talking to Ralph about what he thought I should do, and Ralph suggested that I come back to the Rockefeller. And he wanted to start to work on clinical development himself. People were beginning to use dendritic cells to manipulate them both for cancer and for proof of concept vaccines. And Ralph, as always, thought he could do everything better than everybody else, and he was generally right, and he wanted to do it himself. And I think he knew that I would work with him and that I would do what he said, which was, you know, when he and I were in a room, we were invariably 17 and 34, and I was, though he always called me his colleague, I always called him my boss. And he felt that I could come back and be the clinical director of his laboratory and begin to develop the strategies to use dendritic cells, both for vaccines, for HIV and other diseases that have resisted standard vaccine technology. As Ralph said, we needed to be smarter than nature, and also for cancer immune therapy. So Ralph wasn't quite geared up yet. He was applying for very significant funding from the Gates Foundation. So he arranged for me to come and work with David Ho at the Aaron Diamond, who already had vaccines in development in the clinic. And so I worked about half and half for Ralph and for David. And that was for, I guess, from 2001 or 2002, for quite some time. So Ralph put together a consortium that included David, and we wrote a big Gates grant, and we got funding from the Gates Foundation to develop a vaccine that directly targeted dendritic cells. We were also working with Paul and Clara Rocks in Heidelberg, and with Charlie Rice here on the viruses. Whenever you're working with a virus, if you can get Charlie to help you, you're well advised to do it. And Ralph always saw Charlie as the best expert on the viral component of any project that he was working on, in addition to Charlie being one of the kindest and nicest people around. So we wrote the grant, we got the funding, and we started working on a vaccine that directly targeted dendritic cells to prevent HIV with colleagues from Celldex Therapeutics who were providing the biotech experience, the manufacturing, all of the nitty-gritty of getting the vaccine into the clinic. And it's interesting because at the time, here I went from being the dendritic cell expert at the rare to coming back to the mothership of all dendritic cells, and I wasn't working on dendritic cells, I was doing clinical development. And when my colleagues at the rare asked me who was doing the clinical development and I told them it was me, they laughed because there they had people who were truly expert in each of those disciplines. And, but Ralph had great confidence, and he viewed clinical development as something you could do on the side. And he always talked about how I would eventually, when my kids got older, be able to come back to the lab and do real work. But as time went on, I think his perspective changed, and he saw how important the clinical development piece was and how much it was both necessary and how much work it took. But like everything, Ralph thought if you just worked hard enough, we'd do it better than anybody else.